What is it in a human being that gives up what is comfortable and safe and familiar for something that is not only uncomfortable, but dangerous and life-threatening? Who are we is the animating question in the work that I try to do. And this is a story that woke me up. I think what's so wonderful is that it touches on religious faith in the United States, on the evil of the Holocaust and the monstrous Nazi regime. This intersects with that, with the role of government and what's the responsibility of individual citizens, how individuals can stand up against regimes as brutal as the Nazis. Minister and his wife, they figured out how to write in code. They figured out smuggling of human lives. They figured out how to get past Nazi guards. I mean, this is not stuff they teach you in divinity school.
Greetings and welcome to this, the first in a series of Defying Hate webinars hosted by the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. On October 4th, we'll offer our second installment, Depolarizing Hate, Addressing Polarization in Our Communities and Schools. Details and information about registration can be found on the UUSC website. Today, we offer a sneak peek into the new film, Defying the Nazis, The Sharps' War. This documentary, produced by Ken Burns and Artemis Jakowski, the Sharps' grandson, tells the compelling personal story of the two UUSC founders and their two-year mission to save hundreds of refugees in Europe, beginning in 1939. But their story doesn't stop there. Today, more refugees than ever before face similar dangers to the people saved by the Sharps: persecution, isolation, deprivation, and violence. In short, they face hate. We'll share a bit about the film and ways that UUSC is continuing the work of defending human rights and promoting social justice. Joining us today on our panel is Tom Andrews, President and CEO of UUSC, Rachel Gore-Freed, Vice President and Chief Program Officer of UUSC, and Carrie McDonald, Outreach Director of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And I'm Reverend Paul Langston Daly, the Senior Program Leader for Justice Building, and I'm your moderator today. I'd like to introduce you to Tom Andrews, President and CEO of UUSC. He's a former member of the United States Congress, representing the Congressional District of Maine from 1991 to 1995, following 10 years in the Maine State Legislature. Before joining UUSC, Tom served as President and CEO of United to End Genocide. Tom?
Rachel Sharp said it all to his congregation. He declared war on evil, and he said, what are we to do? Well, we need to ask ourselves the same question. We have to declare war on not only evil, but those who are shirking responsibilities in public office or running for public office, to stand up and do the right thing, to stand up to xenophobia, to stand up to fear, and stand up for the right thing. We have to answer the question, what are we to do with action? And in a short while, you'll be hearing about the various opportunities that we all have to communicate to the administration, very specific calls for action, including ending family detention once and for all, and becoming involved in this movement in which we are standing up for those who are literally running for their lives. You know, there was a poll taken at the time that the Sharps were doing their work, and it was a national poll, and it asked the question, in light of these people coming in from Europe seeking refuge, do you think that the State Department should increase the quota of people coming in, of visas that would be allowed immigrants to come in? 83% of the population of America in 1939 said no. We don't believe that there should be any change. No additional people would be allowed in. And of course, we think back to the St. Louis, that ship that sailed from Germany to first Cuba and then just off the coast of the United States, 973 Jewish refugees seeking hope and salvation and refuge here in the United States, denied visas, returned to Nazi Germany. Hundreds and hundreds of them perished in a concentration camp. This was the arena that the Sharps dealt with. This was their atmosphere, the atmosphere that they had to confront. And they confronted it with great courage, with great tenacity, and a great commitment to the principles and values that are at the core of our movement. It is so important for us to not just recognize the greatness of their courage and tenacity, but to emulate that courage and tenacity in our work. And for everyone here joining us today in this webinar, and for being involved in this movement, I say thank you from the bottom of my heart. We have a great deal of work to do. Thanks so very much.
Thank you, Tom. And now I'd like to introduce you to Rachel Corrie, who is our Vice President and Chief Program Officer. Rachel is a human rights lawyer and oversees our domestic and international programs and advocacy. She's experienced working with affected communities around the world, and we're pleased to have her here today.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm excited to be here with you all today. I am an immigrant myself and have worked in detention centers and in asylum court hearings for many years and seen this problem really unveil itself. But never have I seen it as sort of horrific and to develop this dialogue that's been happening as in the past 10 years. Is my mic on? Just to look at what's going on in the world today and connect this back to our work. I mean, if you look at the news that's coming out of Hungary and the anti-immigrant rhetoric that's being spurned there, and the way that the government's handling this by sending $16 million tax dollars on anti-immigrant campaigns is just appalling, and to think of what's driving that. And I'm so proud to be a part of UUSC and to see the work that our partners, the Helsinki Commission, is doing on the ground to combat this rhetoric and to spread public awareness about immigrants and their reintegration into the society. Getting back more to the conversation on hand and the situation in the Northern Triangle, it's really been neglected in current dialogues around the global refugee crisis. And it's crazy to me because there is a massive, the violence on the ground there is really horrific. At this point right now, there are about 50 homicides per 100,000 individuals in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. This is 50 homicides per 100,000 individuals overall. This is the highest homicide rates in the world, and it rivals those of many conflict zones. So you can understand what's driving this. I mean, it's our historic foreign policy that's impacted this, both economic and security concerns. It is the current policy, and it's also the fact that there's a prevalence of violence and gang impunity, and lack of accountability on the ground there. Women, young children, even young men are experiencing persecution at a rate that is just higher than anywhere else in the world. Despite this, and despite the fact that there are women and children in dire need of protection, our government has sort of posed a welcoming rhetoric, but really, as Tom mentioned, expanded an increasingly aggressive immigration enforcement regime. We have detained thousands of women and children throughout several detention centers in our country this past year. Currently, there are about 2,000 women and children detained in Texas in essentially jails. One looks awfully like an internment camp. Some of the jails are run by private corporations. Those are in Texas, known as Carnes and Dilly. And then there's one run by the Berks County facility in Pennsylvania. As Tom mentioned, we both went down to visit the Berks Detention Center recently, and the situation there is really unconscionable. We visited with children, and as a mother and a human rights lawyer, I just walked away just alarmed that day. You know, it looks like a nice playground, but really in reality, there are children housed in cement blocks, and they've been there for over a year. Most alarming to me is the lack of information that's been provided to the mothers and the general anxiety that they have around their futures. Most of these women have signed orders that they could not read or participated in immigration hearings where they could not understand what was going on. Many lacked representation. And the funny thing to note about this is that these women and children all have uncles, aunts, family, brothers, sisters elsewhere in the country that they could actually be living with. So it doesn't make quite much sense to be housing people for over a year in these detention centers when they, one, pose no threat to their community, and two, they are not a flight risk. So all the justifications for detention don't exist in this case. And of course, we know that the UN and other bodies have held that detention is never in the best interest of a child. The dire mental health and trauma that the mental health considerations and trauma that these children have already endured from on the ground when they were in the push countries, also up to throughout their migration up to the US border, and then now facing this detention and watching their mother's anxiety. So besides the US government's family detention policy, another portion of our approach to this crisis has been a deterrence campaign, even though we don't admit it, to keep migrants from safely reaching our border. There's a constant message around this, that the fact that seeking asylum is a criminal act in the United States. This is actually not true. International law safeguards the right of asylum seekers and the rights of migrants. One of the ways that the administration has used the various policies one of their attempts is to divert attention from the deplorable situation with family jails, is to trumpet the country refugee resettlement programs as safe and legal. Like I said, people have the human right to migrate, and international law protects this. We've actually been working here at UUSC on understanding one of the programs that's called the Central American Minors Program. And there are many Central American foreign policy groups that are trying to look at what this process looks like and how can we make it more effective. There are supposed to be thousands of unaccompanied children able to get through this process from Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. But yet that's not happening. Earlier this year, the statistics were very low for how many children were actually able to make it through. And we're trying to uncover why that is and work with local resettlement organizations and the State Department to really address these concerns. Some of the red flags that have been raised are the extremely long waits that keeps children at risk in the countries while they're waiting for this process to go on. One of the agencies that we've worked with even recently learned that a child was killed while waiting for his application, during his application process. So as I said, our hope is to unveil this new report that's coming out this November and work with federal officials and resettlement organizations to inform this dangerous process. Another thing to note about the release of this documentary and our advocacy around this is that there's a UN Summit on Refugee and Migrants. And there's also a Leaders Summit called by President Obama. As currently planned, Obama's Leadership Summit excludes migrants from the discussion in a favor of focus solely on refugees. This framing has been also troubling because it suggests that the plight of migrants do not fit in the traditional definition of refugees. And it signals a likely shift away from those who the administration considers to threaten our border security. At this point, I'll stop and I'll pass this back to Paul to talk more about the campaign and the other work that we are doing here. Thank you.
So we're going to take a few minutes now to talk about some concrete things you can do to take action in your community and your congregations. And I'd like to introduce you to Corrie McDonald from the UUA staff, who's going to start us off.
Well, it's really great to be on this webinar with you all today. I'm losing my voice a little bit. You'll have to pardon the sultry lower tones here. But I've been working with my good friends at our sibling organization, the UU Service Committee, for the last couple of months on how we as Unitarian Universalists are bringing the Sharps legacy to life. And that's a lot of what you've heard here today. The challenges that they faced are still challenges that our world faces today. And the courage that they displayed is still being displayed by folks across the country who are right now stepping up to the challenge of investing in compassion and justice for refugees and for the religious tolerance and dignity. And so we at the Unitarian Universalist Association have put together some great resources for you to bring that home in your congregation and in your community. In addition to the more specific refugee advocacy types of resources that the UUSC has made available, we've got some great faith development activities, some worship resources, some ways to do solidarity actions and activities with interfaith partners in your community, suggestions for how to do educational events. And that's all in one easy to download PDF, which you will be able to find at uua.org/sharpstory, which you can see right there on your screen. You'll also there find a map of all of the UU groups and congregations that have registered telling us they're doing something about this film. Right now we've got about 30 groups around the country who are who we've added to the map or have added themselves. Anyone can log in. It's really easy to just create an account and add your congregation or your group to the map and let everyone know what you're up to. It's a great way to see how you fit into the larger story of Unitarian Universalists carrying on the Sharps' tradition across the country. So we're really hoping that folks will use the occasion of the broadcast to ramp that up. We've already seen that. Lots of folks are hosting watch parties, and watch parties are great. And we also want to make sure that we don't just watch the movie, that the inspiring story of the Sharps is really motivating us to reach out, to touch our neighbors, to create, to do everything we can to create the kind of world and community that the Sharps dedicated their lives to. So if we could also look at the next slide then. As part of the action project that we've been collaborating with the UUSC about, we've also been working with the FOZ Collaborative at Meadville Lombard Theological School. That's great. And they've put together a curriculum called We Defy Hate, which is a great way for people from different faith backgrounds to get together to talk about the film and what it means. And in case it hasn't been mentioned earlier on this webinar, please know that in addition to the film, there's a great companion book from Beacon Press available to you, which is also conveniently called Defying the Nazis. So if folks don't get a chance to watch the film, they can also read the book, or you can do both. But this is a wonderful faith development resource for religious professionals, leaders, volunteers of all levels to really engage with the powerful message of the film. There we go. That's a great picture right there. So I hope that you're getting out of this webinar that you are surrounded and wrapped up in all kinds of great supports to help make this a successful opportunity to engage with the justice-making tradition of Unitarian Universalism. And we would all love to hear about what you're planning. So be sure to add any events or actions that you have to the map. And I didn't add this in the slides, but if you're near New York City on the day of the broadcast, the afternoon, we're going to be doing a special presentation with Ken Burns himself at Community Church in New York City at 3:30 p.m. If you go to bit.ly/Defying the Nazis event, you can register there. I'll include that in the chat. And UUSC President Tom Andrews, among others, will also be there. And we were planning to live stream it, so we'll carry that through the UUA's Facebook feed and more. But if you are interested in catching up on how the refugee crisis that's going on right now is specifically related to the film and some discussion about that, you can attend in person in New York or watch it live streamed online. So thanks for this opportunity, Paul.
All right. Thank you, Barry. We also have a few opportunities for you to connect through UUSC. We invite you to support Madres Burks, which is the refugee mothers on hunger strike in detention that Rachel shared with us. And there's a link there for you to check that out. Also, we encourage you, if you're not already planning to participate in the Defying Hate Preach-In. That we're hoping folks will do that on September 25th, but if you've not yet scheduled that, we encourage you to plan that. And there are resources available. Guest at Your Table program is on the theme of Defying Hate this year, and we encourage you to do that at the time that makes the most sense for your congregation. So we encourage you to participate in that. And if you haven't yet signed up for the Refugee Rapid Response Network, that's a wonderful opportunity to learn more about what's happening and to respond quickly in cases of emergency. We also have the Refugee Toolkit, Building Bridges, which will help you coordinate activities in your congregations and your community. So please take a moment to check that out as well. And then upcoming events, obviously the film premiere is September 20th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Please check your local station. And on October 4th, as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be having a second in our series of Defying Hate webinars, addressing hateful speech and polarization in our communities and schools. And the registration for that will be available on the UUSC website. So we invite you now to ask any questions you may have. We invite you to use the Q&A in the middle of the bottom of your screen. At the middle there's a little box that says Q&A. If you click on that, it'll pop up with your with a box for you, and you'll be able to ask questions there. So I hope you'll take a moment to ask any questions you might have for us. Have you got any questions yet? Sure. Okay, Terry, Carrie, can you tell us a little bit more about the New York City event?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So as I said, it's going to be at 3:30 p.m., 3:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time on September 20th. And we're going to start off with some clips of the film like you've seen here, probably a little different set of clips, and hear from Ken Burns himself talk about the ways in which the film is just so relevant today, given the conversations that are being had in our political discourse, given the reality of, you know, the worst refugee crisis in the world since World War II. And it's happening at the same time that the United Nations General Assembly is having a number of high-level conversations about the refugee crisis, literally blocks away from this event. President Obama is going to be there talking about this. In fact, they just had an event at the White House yesterday with some of the senior administration officials talking, where they screened clips from the film and got some word from those folks. So it's really an important issue, and it's really great that you all have taken the time to join this webinar, because there's a lot going on. So this is a great way to connect this UU story with the ways in which we as people of faith and conscience are responding to this crisis. So I pasted a link to the place where you can register for tickets in the chat, and we'll also make sure that we post the live stream event there as well.
Rachel, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the partners working on the ground.
Yeah, so we have several partners. We have a program that's called the Rights at Risk program, and we've been working on addressing both the root causes of violence on the ground in El Salvador and Honduras. And we have partners that are based in Mexico and at the US border that work on ensuring the protection of migrants and doing advocacy around migrant rights. These are organizations that work in shelters, they work with women on gender-based violence, and they work with affected communities in the area. We also, with our research report, we're collaborating with a number of organizations that directly represent affected communities and are working with women and children seeking asylum from the PUSH countries involved, the Northern Triangle countries. And then we have additional partners in the United States that are working in the detention centers. Was there a more specific question in mind? Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you very much. We have a number of questions that have come up on the chat here. There was a question about whether or not there were events scheduled for Boston. And I do know that there's nothing scheduled before the premiere, but on October 5th at Wellesley Hills, they will be showing the film, and Artemis will be there, and Tom Andrews will also be there for that event. Let's see, what else we got going on here. Do you know if the documentary makes any links between the refugee situation the Sharps faced and the situation we face today? The film does not explicitly make those links, and that's something that we hope that you will do if your minister will be preaching on this topic. There's also, as I mentioned in the resources, there's lots of ways in which today's situation mirrors a lot what happened back in the 1930s. So we hope that you'll take some time to look at some of the resources available both at the UUA and at UUSC to make those links more effectively. Let's see, we got a question here about what do you see as the differences between Central American and Syrian refugee crises, especially in how the US is responding? Can we get either Tom, is Tom still with us? Can Tom answer that perhaps?
And I think it's a very good question about the relationship between the two. I think one of the big distinctions right now, obviously there are now 65 million people who have been forcibly displaced, and much of that is happening as a result of the Syrian civil war and the horrible atrocities going on there. But the difference with the administration in response to Central America is that, well, first of all, it's being ignored. The people coming, literally running from their lives from, as Rachel was saying, one of the most violent places on earth, they're not being recognized for the asylum seekers who they are. And so when the president, as Corrie mentioned, speaks in New York to world leaders in an event focusing on the refugee crisis that he's hosting, he will not mention the Central American refugees, which is particularly unfortunate because the United States of America and previous governments have had a key role to play in creating the conditions in which these people are running from. We also see that the administration, as I mentioned before, has established policies that we think are incredibly unfair. They're detrimental to children, and they're unnecessary. And that is why we have launched an open letter to the president calling for him to eliminate family detention, to maintain family unity as these families go through this process of asylum. And that the United States grant temporary protection status to those people running from this part of Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And you can join that effort, sign this open letter to the president, and ask him to change course with what we think is the wrong policy, and again, one reflective of this overall climate of fear and xenophobia that we're facing. So you can get all the information from that on our website, and we certainly encourage you to do so and to sign that open letter to the president.
We have a question that asks about the event on September 20th at 3:30, if it'll be available to watch online, and I'm going to have Corrie answer that question for you all.
Yes, so you don't need to register to watch the event online, although you can. But the registration is for going in person in New York. And so we will post a link to where you can catch the live stream on that registration page. And we're also going to carry it through the UUA's Facebook feed. So on the day of, you can either visit that page, or you can visit the event page, or you can just find the UUA's Facebook page and you'll see the live stream right there. And we'll be trying to get out these links also through our other social media channels and email lists that we already have. So if you're on any of those, you should get a link as well. So I don't have the live streaming link today, but we will have it for you very soon.
Great. Thanks. Appreciate that. And we have a question about the screening at the panel and discussion at the White House. A question was raised from an audience member along the lines of, what if every congregation in the US hosted one refugee family? Is this feasible for UU congregations? Rachel, is that a question you can answer?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what level can you host a refugee family. There are once a refugee is admitted to the United States, there's a process by which resettlement agencies work with refugees to ensure to ensure that they can support themselves, and they work with them to help and get jobs and have temporary housing. That period of time is a set period of time, and often families are in need of other types of support and assistance. But the goal is to work towards self-sustainability. And so the question is at what point can you help, and which agencies can you work with? And there is a lot of information on our website that's for how you can connect with local resettlement organizations to locally volunteer and meet various refugee family needs, and also what you can do in terms of further support in your community. So for the first period of time, it's mostly working with the families of these resettlement agencies, and then for the longer period, there's an option for how communities can support the families themselves.
Great. And we have another question about the difference between refugees and asylum seekers. If you could give those definitions, I think that would be helpful.
Yes, it's a technical definition, a legal definition. Asylum seeker is someone who is not in the United States border, is in the United States border, has come to the United States and is physically in our country and is seeking refuge in the seeking safety in the United States based on their well-accounted fear of persecution based on a variety of factors. For a refugee, there's someone who's actually physically abroad and applying for refugee through the UN or through the State Department resettlement procedures based on the same fear of persecution. And the difference is that they're actually abroad versus being in the United States.
There was a question about whether or not we could re-show the links, and I certainly can do that so you all can see those. So here are the links for the Rapid Response Network and for the Preach-In, and also for the support madres at Berks, if you want to take a minute to look at those. All right, and we have another question. What is the timeline for working with these resources? I'm foreseeing the opportunities to bring some folks together on this after the first of the year. Will the film be available for rescreening?
So there are a couple of options for screening or for screening the film. Obviously, you can watch the broadcast, but you need a TV hookup, right? So you need, your cable or your converter box or something like that. You can also purchase the DVD from PBS, and that's probably going to be the easiest thing for most groups and congregations. PBS will allow you to purchase also an educational version, which can be used for nonprofit, public good settings to show it to an audience. So you can invite people and there's no licensing problems. So that's probably going to be the version that you're most likely going to want to buy. So I have, I'm going to give you a link to where you can purchase the film and the book on the Defying the Nazis website. I'm going to paste that in the chat, available to everyone. So that's probably going to be the easiest thing. You purchase the DVD. It won't ship until the film actually is broadcast on the 20th, but then you can show it anytime you want.
Well, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today. This has been a wonderful opportunity to have you hear what's happening with Defying Hate and with our film. So we hope that you'll have a viewing party at your congregation or in your community. And we're pleased that everyone had the opportunity to join us today. I want to just offer a special thank you to our panelists, to Tom and to Rachel and to Carrie, and to also for our tech support, Cameron and Shayna and Shelley, who've done some wonderful work here, keeping us all online here, and also to Paul Twitchell. So thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon, and we hope we'll see you on the 4th of October for our next webinar. Thanks.